Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our Baseball, Racism, and Religion webinar hosted by Park Hill United Methodist Church here in Denver, Colorado, and also our friends at the United Methodist Association of Retired Clergy and Friends. My name is Nathan Adams. I use the pronouns he, him, and his, and we are delighted to have you here with us this evening. We've got some great panelists lined up with us today to have a good conversation. We've got folks from across our country that are watching us at different times. We are live streaming also on YouTube this evening. So we welcome everybody that's here on the Zoom call, but also everyone who is watching on YouTube or who might be watching after this evening. We're great to have you here. We're excited to have you here tonight as we continue the work of anti-racism and racial justice. Tonight, we're going to be honoring and remembering, celebrating the life of Byron Johnson, who was a Negro Leaguer himself. He's a former Park Hill United Methodist Church member, and you're going to hear more about him in just a few moments this evening tonight. Just a couple of house things to get in order. If you're joining us on the Zoom call tonight, meaning that you registered for the call and you're on the Zoom call, we ask that you go ahead and mute yourself throughout the call and also stop your video. We're going to only have the panelists and myself that are going to be featured on the video. That's largely so that you don't pop up on YouTube, however you might be enjoying tonight's webinar. So do go ahead again, mute yourself. If you also have your video on, go ahead and stop your video. If you see it go off, that simply means my colleague, Pastor Laura, has gone ahead and done that to try to give you a helping hand as well. If you're on YouTube watching this evening, you don't have to worry about those things. We are going to have an opportunity later in our time together this evening to take questions from you all. So if you're on Zoom, you'll be able to use that chat feature on Zoom. And if you're on YouTube and you have access to it, I know that it depends on what device you're on sometimes, but if you have access to the chat box in the YouTube section, you'll be able to ask questions on YouTube as well. We'll be monitoring the chat box here and as well over on YouTube. So we are excited to have you here tonight. I want to give several thank yous to a lot of different people and organizations tonight that have had a hand in making tonight possible. And so we want to take a moment just to do that, to thank Jackie Benton, who is the daughter of Byron Johnson. I want to thank Carlotta Walls LaNier, who you'll hear more about here in just a moment, the nephew of Byron Johnson, the nephew. Shame on me, Carla, the niece of Byron Johnson. We're going to thank our Park Hill United Methodist Church Stewardship Committee, Reverend Dr. Don Messer, Byron Hiddle, and Pastor Laura, who had a hand in helping make today. Lots of planning going in tonight. I also want to thank our friends over at the United Methodist Association of Retired Clergy and Friends, and of course, each of our great panelists that you'll hear more about here in just a few moments. Tonight, we want to have some fun. We're going to have some fun talking about some fun topics like baseball, but also talking about some maybe interesting topics, we'll say, such as religion, but also important topics such as racism, and how the three different topics interact with one another. Park Hill United Methodist Church has a long history of doing this type of work, of anti-racism work, of being a leader in racial justice here in the Denver community and beyond, as our friends do as well with the United Methodist Association of Retired Clergy and Friends. Park Hill United Methodist Church integrated in the late 50s and 60s, which was a big deal, and remains an integrated church today, multicultural, multiracial church, and has continued the work of anti-racism. Just this week, our Park Hillers were featured on 9 News, our local NBC affiliate here in the Denver area, as they continue now for well over a year to ring bells in honor of George Floyd. They continue to ring out the news, the good news, indeed, the proclamation that Black Lives Matter. And so we're excited here tonight to continue the conversation as the Major League Baseball season winds down here this weekend and the playoffs begin. We thought this would be a great time as people are perhaps checking out the standings. I know if you're here in the Denver, the Rockies have been eliminated for a while. Apologies for that, but there are others of fan bases that are pretty excited for the next week to get started. So let's jump in a little bit. Let's hear about Byron Johnson tonight. Let me share with you his bio that comes to us from more than a headstone. So Byron Johnson. Byron Johnson was an athlete, an educator, an advocate for civil rights. He was born in Little Rock, Arkansas, the grandson of a slave. his life would take on numerous challenges and opportunities. As a child, Johnson excelled in athletes, and after graduating from Wiley College in Texas, one of the first Black colleges established west of the Mississippi River, Johnson went on to play baseball in the Negro Leagues, an association of baseball teams made up of Black players who were excluded and segregated from white-only professional leagues. Johnson played shortstop for the Kansas City Monarchs in 1937 and 38, and infielder for Satchel Paige's traveling team in 39 and 1940. Johnson was drafted into the U.S. Army in 1941. He served in Europe until 1945. During his time in the service, like other African Americans, Johnson served in a segregated unit. His request to enter officers candidate school was declined given that African Americans were not allowed to serve as officers. Only white officers were allowed to lead all Black units. As such, Johnson described his time in the military one of the hardest time periods of his life. In 1958, at the height of racial tension and violence, Johnson left the South and settled his family in Denver, Colorado, where he lived with his wife, Christine, an elementary school teacher, and their children, daughter Jacqueline and son Joseph, who died of lupus at age 14. Johnson worked as a U.S. postal clerk until his retirement in the 1970s. He also gave traveling lectures about racial discrimination. His wife encouraged the latter endeavor and inspired the creation of the Christine and Byron Johnson Memorial Lecture Series at their Methodist Church in Denver, Parco. The lectures served to raise awareness on race in the United States. Johnson is remembered as a modest individual, one who reflected on his experiences as such. In his biography, Legacy of a Monarch, which I hear we can help make available if you'd like to get a copy of it, Legacy of a Monarch, Johnson says, most of us focus on trying to get through life the best way we can. I'm not extraordinary, but I guess I've had an extraordinary life. He died from prostate cancer at the age of 94 in 2005, the oldest Negro Leagues ball player in Colorado at that time. So to help us this evening to continue to honor the life of Mr. Johnson and his legacy and the great work that he did here in the Denver area and around our country, we've got three really esteemed colleagues, panelists tonight that I'm excited about. I shared on my Facebook page yesterday that as a pastor, I get to do some really fun and incredible things, and being tonight genuinely with the three of you it ranks right up there. So I'm honored to be with you. We have three great panelists. I'm going to introduce them in alphabetical order. And so let me share a little bit with you all about the three of them. Our first guest tonight is the Reverend Dr. Christopher H. Evans. He's a professor of history of Christianity and Methodist Studies at Boston University School of Theology. Dr. Evans came to SCH in 2010 after several years on the faculty of Colgate Rochester Crozer Divinity School, where he served as professor of church history. His teaching and scholarship focus on the history of Christianity, American religion, United Methodist history, and ministry studies. He is the author of several books, articles, and reviews, including The Faith of 50 Million, Baseball, Religion, and American Culture, which he co-edited with William R. Herzog II. His latest book, The Social Gospel and American Religion, was published by New York University Press, an ordained elder in the Upper New York Annual Conference of the United Methodist Church. Dr. Evans has lectured, preached, and taught in numerous church and professional settings, and has been a presenter at several academic conferences. Welcome, Dr. Reverend Evans. We're glad to have you with us. Thank you for taking time and for, I assume, staying up with us late this evening there on the East Coast.
It's my pleasure, Nathan. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Our second guest is Bob Kendrick, who's the president of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. Bob Kendrick was named the president of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum in March of 2011. It was founded in 1990. The NLBM is the world's only museum dedicated to preserving and celebrating the rich history of African American baseball and its profound impact on the social advancement of America. Kendrick is responsible for the museum's day-to-day operation and the development and implementation of strategies to advance the mission of the 501c3 not-for-profit organization. Since joining the NLBM in 2011, he has helped orchestrate a nearly $20 million turnaround that has helped the NLBM regained its vitality and financial stability. And Bob, I had to cut out some of the awards that you won that are on your bio, but I would still want to lift up a couple of them. Among many of his awards and honors, the Kansas City Call newspaper named him the Person of the Year in 2020. In 2021, this year, the Beta Lambda chapter of the Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity named him Business Person of the Year, and he was bestowed honorary doctorate degrees from Judson University and William Jewell College, respectively, in 2021. He's a native of Crawfordville, Georgia. Bob received a basketball scholarship to attend Park College in Parkville, Missouri in 1980 and earned a BA degree in communication arts in 1985. Welcome, Bob. We're so glad to have you. I believe you're an hour ahead of us, so not quite as late for you there.
Not quite as ahead as Christopher is, but right. I'm thrilled to be a part of this esteemed group and, just honored to be invited to participate. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for being with us. And lastly, but certainly not least, we have with us Carlotta Walls LaNier. This is her biography adopted from the National Women's Hall of Fame. This is Carlotta Walls LaNier, at age 14, was the youngest of 9 courageous African-American students known as the Little Rock Nine, who integrated Little Rock Central High School in 1957. The integration of the Arkansas High School was a catalyzing event in the American Civil Rights Movement, testing the landmark decision by the U.S. Supreme Court declaring segregation in public schools unconstitutional. That was, of course, Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka in 1954. After graduating from Central High in 1960, she studied at Michigan State University for 2 years before moving to Colorado. She enrolled at the University of Northern Colorado and earned her bachelor's degree in 1968. She, along with other members of the Little Rock Nine, is the recipient of the nation's highest civilian honor, the Congressional Gold Medal, awarded by President Bill Clinton in 1999. Also awarded the prestigious Spingarn Medal from the NAACP and the Lincoln Leadership Prize awarded by the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library Foundation. She was a recipient of 4 honorary doctorates. Make sure I read that right. 4 honorary doctorate degrees and is inductee in the Colorado Women's Hall of Fame. She remains active in numerous community organizations in Colorado and serves as the president of the Little Rock Nine Foundation, a financial aid and mentoring organization dedicated to ensuring equal access to education for children of color. She is the niece of Byron Johnson, who we'll hear from here in just a moment, and a longtime member of Park Hill United Methodist Church. And I am honored to be one of her pastors. Welcome, Carlotta. We're excited to have you here with us.
Well, thank you very much. It's great to be here, and it's wonderful that you are handling this panel discussion here this evening.
Thank you, Carlotta. Well, welcome, Chris and Bob and Carlotta, and friends that are watching. You can see why I'm pretty excited and have this silly grin on my face and feel honored for the opportunity to be able to chat with these folks tonight. So we're going to start with just a couple of bio questions, kind of set the stage for our conversation tonight, get to know our panelists a little more. These are pretty straightforward, easy questions, I think, panelists, but I want to give you the opportunity, if there's just something you're burning to tell everyone tonight about yourself that I missed in your bios, please feel free to do that. But also, first, would you tell us your religious background, if you have one, since we're talking about religion tonight? And would you also tell us how you identify racially or ethnically, since we're talking about race tonight? And I promised that I would model for you all first. So I grew up non-denominational as a Christian until about high school when I joined the United Methodist Church, which is part of what I am today, United Methodist pastor. I identify both as Black and African-American, but also as multiracial, as biracial, as my father comes from African descent, my mother from European descent. So Chris, why don't you tell us about yourself?
Well, thank you, Nathan, and thank you again to you and to the community of Park Hill for including me in this amazing conversation tonight. It's an honor to be a participant. I have been, I suppose, a cradle United Methodist. I grew up in Syracuse, New York, and as was mentioned, I am an ordained elder in the United Methodist Church. I've served a number of churches. I do identify as white. I have been involved in a number of different types of ministry over the years. And in terms of just maybe a little interesting fact, which will be something perhaps I'll get into in a little bit, my love of baseball really comes through growing up in a minor league city in Syracuse, New York. I learned to love baseball through watching the Syracuse Chiefs, and I could never understand why all the players that I loved in the minor leagues would suddenly be called up to play for the New York Yankees. It just didn't make any sense to me at all. But I've instilled a love of the game early on and still have it. But again, if we have time to talk about tonight, I do have concerns and reservations about the game.
Great. Thank you, Chris. Why don't we go to Carlotta next?
Well, thank you, Nathan. I'm the oldest daughter of Juanita and Cartel U. Walls. I am the youngest of the Little Rock Nine. That's about the only thing I have among the nine that I can claim that they cannot challenge. I am a Methodist. I have been. I was christened and baptized at White's Memorial Methodist Church in Little Rock, Arkansas. I identify as African American or Black. At times I check a lot of those others on there because there are a lot of others. I'm a real estate broker here in Colorado and author of a book, A Mighty Long Way, My Journey to Justice at Little Rock Central High School. The wife of Ike LaNier, and the mother to two children, Whitney LaNier and Brooke McLean. And I have two grandchildren who are Reese LaNier and Jalen McLean. And I grew up as a baseball fan. So I cannot say that I'm into it now. And it's a lot of reasons as to how things have developed over the years. My mother still watches baseball. In fact, at this moment, she's watching the Rockies, probably losing down there in Arizona. But anyway.
All right, thank you, Carlotta. Getting us laughing already. Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, Bob, your turn.
Well, I grew up in Crawfordville, Georgia, and I grew up in African Methodist Episcopal Church, small church there in Crawfordville, Georgia. Understanding that Crawfordville, Georgia is all of 500 people. And so a small African Methodist Episcopal church, all my friends went to Friendship Baptist Church. And so every now and then I sneak over with them over at Friendship Baptist Church. And here in Kansas City, St. James United Methodist Church, former pastor Emmanuel Cleaver, United States Congressman Emmanuel Cleaver, now E3, his son, is the head pastor over at St. James United Methodist Church. And so I'm the youngest of 6 boys, the baby of the bunch. And so my poor mother, she had 6 of us, and came to Kansas City in 1980, chasing a basketball, and of course now make my living in baseball, albeit baseball history.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Bob. I think your pastor and I have our alma mater seminary in common. You have to check with the Methodist Theological School in Ohio. You can check with them. Let's do another kind of quick hitter. Carlotta, why don't we start with you, only because you kind of chatted a little bit about it. I think, Chris, you did as well. And that is just simply, if you have a current favorite baseball team, go ahead and share that. And if you have a favorite player from the past, not a current player, but a player.
Yes, that is very, very easy. Jackie Robinson and the Brooklyn Dodgers. I had the pleasure of watching Jackie Robinson play in the old Ebbets Field in New York City at the age of 8. And that was always my team. Roy Campanella, the whole group of them. Duke Snyder was my favorite. My other uncle who lived in New York, was a New York Giant. The Giant fan. So we battled both back and forth. He was a Willie Mays fan and I was a Duke Snider fan. But Jackie Robinson, for all the reasons as we will discuss later, was my favorite player.
Fantastic. Thank you, Carlotta. Bob, I want to go to you next.
Well, I grew up in Georgia. I'm an Atlanta Braves fan. I became a Kansas City Royal fan when I started living here, but really when I started working at the museum, because the Royals are big supporters of the museum. So I had very little choice but to become a fan of those who are helping support this organization. And so I'm still torn between, my lifelong allegiance to the Braves and of course, the fact that our Royals have been such great supporters of this museum. I grew up a Henry Aaron fan. I wanted to be Henry Aaron when I was a kid. Henry Aaron was my childhood idol. And, the greatest thrill for me was getting an opportunity to walk Mr. Aaron through this museum. And as I've shared the story on any number of times, it was the only time that I've ever been starstruck. And again, we've had American presidents tour this museum, first ladies of these United States, a plethora of athletes and entertainers, and as I oftentimes say, with no disrespect to any of them, they are not Henry Aaron in the eyes, minds, and heart of this kid from Crawfordville, Georgia. And so walking him through this museum was the biggest thrill in my life. And the only time I've ever been starstruck until the day that he died. Anytime I was around him, I was starstruck. I was always reduced to that 12-year-old kid who circled the bases in his parents' living room when Henry Aaron hit home run 715. I'm circling the bases in my parents' living room. I was
there.
Jumping for joy. And so I got to share that story with him. And I've oftentimes said, most of us have sports heroes. And it's not often that we get to meet them. And sometimes when we do, they don't always live up to our lofty expectations. But Henry Aaron far exceeded anything that this little kid from Crawfordville, Georgia could have ever dreamt of. And as I shared with you guys when I was there out in you all's neck of the woods to speak over at the theater, there's still a piece of my heart that's missing with the passing of that legendary man who was not only one of the greatest baseball players, but I think one of the greatest human beings to ever walk the face of this earth. He was a philanthropist. He was a civil rights icon. He was a tremendous businessman. He sent so many kids to school who wouldn't have been able to do so. So his generosity was amazing. And, I just finished, we do a little podcast here called Black Diamonds. And last week we dedicated that podcast to Henry Aaron. And I'm sure we'll get a chance to talk about it because it's embedded in my mind while I celebrated the home run chase and him ultimately breaking the home run record, how difficult it was for him during his chase of Ruth. And you think about that, that's 27 years after Jackie Robinson. 27 years after Jackie Robinson, and Henry Aaron is facing the same level of hate and vitriol that welcomed Jackie into the major league. But again, I don't want to get ahead of myself.
Oh man, that's fantastic. All right, Chris, I don't know if you can top that, but let us, I know you said.
No, I definitely, well, I maybe a little bit. But I had a very conflicted childhood with baseball because I did embrace the New York Yankees, but in my early 20s, I had an Emmaus Road experience that made me a Red Sox fan.
Oh my God.
And the first game I went to at Fenway Park, back in the early 80s, where tickets, a box seat only cost $15. But being about 5 feet away from Carl Yastrzemski and Jim Rice signing autographs was something special. I do have to say, though, that probably one of the most mountaintop experience for me when it comes to baseball in 1998, I was very fortunate to have the pleasure of meeting Buck O'Neill. He spoke to a gathering. I was living in Rochester, New York at the time. And I'll never forget that he began his address by singing a verse from the song, "Love is all I have to give to you," that some of you might remember. But it was just having seen the Ken Burns documentary from a few years earlier and having the chance to really learn about Buck O'Neill's life after that program, to meet him and really to experience his grace and holiness was just something I'll never forget.
His brother lived in Rochester, Chris. Yeah, he had a brother, Warren, that lived in Rochester.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I know that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Warren was a little bit younger than Buck, but he lived in Rochester. And so Warren was a cup of coffee guy in the Negro Leagues, didn't have the extensive career that Buck had. But Buck is my guy. So, I just lit up when you said Buck O'Neill.
Right.
I thought you might say that about hearing you talk about that previously, for sure. But you guys have these amazing stories and connections to players and teams. And I feel like I should explain some of my paraphernalia because my history, fandom in baseball is a little complicated. I won't go into it too much, but I was born and raised in Northeastern Ohio. And so it was raised as a Cleveland Indians fan. As we talk about race tonight, I'm glad they're changing their name to the Guardians next year. But I grew up in the 90s as an elementary, middle schooler. And so when they had those great teams that lost to the Braves and eventually the Marlins in the World Series, I was a huge Carlos Baerga fan. The jersey I have behind me, he was second and third baseman. And for the really, really important reason is that my family thought that I looked like him. So I was like, that's cool. I'll root for him. And liked him so much that when he got traded eventually to the New York Mets, which is the jersey I have back there, became a huge Mets fan until I finally moved to Florida. And my in-laws converted me into a Tampa Bay Rays fan, one of the few, certainly out here in Denver, that's a Rays fan. And that one is going to stick. That's been for about 10 years now or so. So rooting for them, happy that they won the AL East. We'll see what they do. And of course, when you're in Rome, you have to root for the local team. Since the Rockies are here, happy to root for them, especially as they're a National League team and rarely ever come across the Rays path. So, excited for that. Well, thank you all for sharing those stories. We're going to take a moment, everyone, for about 10 minutes or so. We're going to play a video, part of a video of Byron Johnson, so that you get a chance to hear from him directly. This is a video I believe that Larry Alexander helped to make happen. To Trailblazers is what it's called for Byron Johnson. We're going to hear tonight about how Byron ended up, in his opinion, with the Kansas City Monarchs. We're going to hear some funny stories about him trying to learn how to hit a curveball, and then we'll hear him talk a little bit about Jackie Robinson and some of the players that he had the opportunity to play with. So just give me a moment and we'll get this going here with us tonight.
Try out in Kansas City.
I got a letter from the Monarchs wanting me to come try out for the team because they'd heard about my playing, So I didn't want to go because I was kind of a homeboy. I loved my dad and I wanted to stay around him. But he said, Byron, you got a sister and a brother in Kansas City. I said, go on. The man sent you a two-way ticket. If you don't like it, come on back home. That's the reason I went to try to make the game. All right. So I got there, rode most of the night, went out to the game. And when we got there, we were playing Birmingham Blackburns. That was another team. And they didn't have a team near as good as the Monarchs, so we were way ahead. So the owner of the Monarchs came down to, Johnson, I know you might be tired, but this would be a good time for me to try you, to put you out there. Now, I looked out there, the man playing, I'm a shortstopper. the man playing shortstop for the Kansas City Monarchs, I knew him. He was from right down there in Monroe, Louisiana. That big rascal come up and hit 1 or 2 home runs in every game. Now here I am, I'm no home run hitter. But what I don't know, he couldn't make the double play. So, that's what he wanted. So I went out there and played, and to make it short, I'd been out there a couple of days, and a man hit a ball across second, and I just went across with one of my favorite plays to make a double play, and the people in the stands just clapped. I couldn't understand why they were raising so much sand. But they say, we haven't had this. This is what we've been wanting, a shortstop that can make the double play. So, I know I made another one in the next game, but old Cooper, he came and told Brown, well, Brown, you can go to the outfield because I done found me a shortstop. And that's the way I made the Monarch. All right, now, I was never then what you would call a good hitter. I could hit anybody I thought fastball. Curveballs mess with me. They're kind of hard to me. But to make that short, Buddy Rogan, who was an old Monarch, was a manager and coach and played when I got there. And he found out I wanted to learn how to hit the curveball. He said, if you come out here in the morning when everybody else is asleep, I'll teach you how to hit a curveball. Well, you've heard of Satchel Paige, but I bet you haven't heard of Buddy Rogan. Well, I tell you right now, Buddy Rogan was just as good as Satchel Paige. And they give him credit. He just went in the Hall of Fame. Just went in the Hall of Fame. But I went out and he changed up my stance. And this is what it tickles me, because I don't know if you follow the Rockies. I don't know whether you follow baseball, but you know, like this is the home plate. Most times we stand like this, or we stand back here and come in here. All right, I would stand here. All right, when I got the bullet, he said, wait a minute. This is the way I want you to stand. Now, give you the pitcher. Now, look the way he had me standing. I'm facing the pitcher. I don't like this. I ain't never faced no pitcher. I said, well, what am I going to do? But he said, you going to stand up there. He said, if you strike at it, it's $5 every time you strike at the ball. I want you to stand there. Now, we playing a game. All right. He said, now, so I stood there. He said, I want you to see every seam on that ball. I ain't never seen a ball that way. But it finally comes to me, after I did it, I could see the ball. See, I've been going with the pitcher's arm motion when I bat. Now he wants me to go with the ball, to watch the ball, not the pitcher's arm. So he started me back here. Now, reading, I'm saying this is so funny. Now, you might not follow baseball, but Galarraga, who was one of the best hitters we had, you remember how he stood at the plate? What's so funny? Buddy Rogan had me standing at the plate there in 38 to teach me how to hit curveball. Now, what that is this. When I'm here, I got away from the ball. Now, fastball, I could hit. A curveball, see, I kind of step back instead of forward. And then the ball over there, I wasn't there. But now look at the difference. Back here, there's no way I can step away from the ball, because if I do, I'll be way out there. So when the ball comes now, instead of stepping back, I got to do this. And that's where I learned how to hit the curveball. And I was so proud. But those old boys were good. Now Trent, another great pitcher for Chicago American Giants. He was one of the best pitchers. He had 3 what they call curveballs. He had one what they call a round way and come down. He had another one come in here and break it. He had another one break across that corner out there. Now you gotta be ready to hit it, I'm telling you. Because you don't know what. All right, so I get set for old Trent. When we met Trent, I got up to the plate with my new stand. Don't you know that gum Trent struck me out with a fastball. Now all my days, I've been saying I can hit anybody's fastball. He struck me out. I was so disappointed. And I told Bully, why didn't you tell me? He said, I wanted you to learn. He said, I knew what he was going to do. Said, when he saw your stance, he knew somebody had been teaching you. That's why he threw you a fastball. He knew you wasn't thinking about no fastball. I wasn't. I was getting ready for the curve. He said, now you're ready to learn how to hit. He said, you got to stand back here. You got to be ready for anything. But watch the ball. Watch the ball. That's what you got to hit. So he taught me how to hit. So Bullet Rogan is one of the greats. You asked me about some of the greats. Jackie Robinson came to play my position when I quit with the Monarchs. I think about 43 when he came up. But we had several, they asked me when I go around, was Jackie Robinson the best player we had? I said, no, man. But Jackie Robinson was the best player they could select to go into the first big league game. Because keep in mind, Jackie Robinson had a college education. He had played against white boys out there. He wasn't scared. And I still think, even though he wasn't the best player, he was the best one at that time. And he proved it. Because they said we were not good enough to play. I said, what did Jackie do? Jackie proved how good we were. And I tell them, when I go around talking to all these white people now, they some of them still want to say, I said, listen, look at the record. I said, Jackie Robinson, in 1947, when he played his first game, that first year, what did he do? He made Rookie of the Year. Now, you said we couldn't play as you did. I said, he wasn't as good. He was better. He beat them all out. I said, that's the answer to our play. And like I tell them now, they say, no, we were not good, but I played with people. I had, the 4 of my teammates have made the Hall of Fame with the white. 4 of my teammates. I tell them, I said, I must have been pretty good to play with people that made your Hall of Fame. So when I went back to Cooperstown, I got to see all that. So we had plenty of good ball players. No question about it. They just wouldn't let us know.
It's true.
I hope you enjoyed watching. I love that line when he's asked about Jackie Robinson being the best player. Nah, man. We had lots of folks that we could play, or that could play. But obviously, Mr. Johnson talked about baseball. I know we've got some baseball players that are either watching this live or going to watch this afterwards. We give you some coaching advice there for helping you with the curveball and not tipping yourself there by your stance. But of course, he also talked about race. And so tonight we're talking here about the intersection of baseball and racism, and religion. And so I just want to open it up to our 3 panelists, kind of step out of the way, give you each an opportunity, just broadly speaking. And I know it's a broad question, but that's all right. Take it where you want. Where have you and your experiences, your expertise, your areas of expertise in your life, where have you seen the intersection of the intersectionality of baseball and of race and of religion? I don't know if whoever would like to start, just jump right in.
Well, I'd just like to say, definitely baseball and racism is the whole Jackie Robinson story. I mean, Byron just told you about that. The book, When Only the Ball Was White, I think a lot of people really should take the time and read that one. The Negro Baseball League really, and I know Bob can talk to this, integration eventually broke the Negro League, unfortunately. And a whole lot of these players are now being retroactively welcomed into the Baseball Hall of Fame. Now, we're going to wait and see how that really works out because, you know, the statistics are saying one thing, and people, there are a lot of people out there that are not going to want to accept some of the things that we know is true. Okay. So, and as far as religion into baseball, coming from the South, coming from Little Rock, Arkansas, baseball was religion or is religion. So, I mean, I can't put it any other way. So, you know, it's unfortunately, though, pathetic racism carried on by the white churches in the South during the Jim Crow days and beyond. So, you know, it just kind of continued as I see it, you know, as far as the interaction or intersection of baseball, racism, and religion.
Thank you, Carlotta. Bob or Chris?
I think that one of the things about baseball that attracts me, and I know this is something shared by a lot of people, and Bob, you mentioned this, I love the history of baseball because I think it's a prism to the best and the worst of America, looking at American history. When you think of Martin Luther King's famous statement about the Christian church, that the church should be the headlight to American society rather than the taillight, you see the same pattern with baseball. Baseball, and this is something I talk about in my book, Faith of 50 Million, baseball projects, I think, a kind of civil religion of American uniqueness that has been the product of poets and popular writers. Certainly Ken Burns' film, which I think was magnificent in a number of respects, nevertheless really does play on this idea of baseball's inherent uniqueness. But the mythology of baseball hides a lot. For those of you who have gone to Cooperstown, New York, an extremely beautiful upstate New York community, I have to say too, another baseball story. My dad took me to the Hall of Fame induction in 1969, and I got to see Roy Campanella go into the Hall of Fame. Great memories as a child, but when good Protestants talk about that they don't believe in relics, well, that's misproven when you go to a place like Cooperstown. But many of you know this, the kind of creation story that was really manufactured in the early 20th century around the origin of baseball, that a white Civil War general, Abner Doubleday, kind of like the Immaculate Conception, that as a young child created this game in 1839, is reflective of the way I think sometimes organized baseball historically has tried to promote, again, a myth of its inherent goodness and its uniqueness. When in fact, again, as many of you are probably aware, baseball our game of baseball is an amalgamation of a number of different games. I want to say another aspect, and I think this brings in the conversation of racism to the forefront and talking about Jackie Robinson. When you look at Jackie Robinson's entry into the so-called or white major leagues, it also needs to be remembered that back in 1884, an African-American named Moses Fleetwood Walker played for the Toledo Blue Stockings and is oftentimes recognized as one of the first African Americans to play in white organized baseball. And the way that he and other African Americans of the late 19th century were cast out, and the persistent campaign over the years of many individuals in the Black community to open those doors is in itself a very fascinating story. And I think part of Jackie's story that's been told a great deal and has been shown in the media is the kind of relationship he had with Branch Rickey, the sense again of this kind of nonviolent warrior. But if you've read works on Jackie Robinson, and I think of his autobiography, I Never Had It Made, it really brings out Robinson was a prism for Black suffering through many generations. And again, the kind of discordant notes that he raised about organized baseball today, I think, are still very real. And one of the questions that is on the agenda this evening is the question of why so many African Americans have turned away from baseball. So I think, again, the question of that ongoing appeal of the mythology, but also the way that I think it's important to uncover the reality of the history that baseball tells, both about the game and about America.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chris. We'll come back to the role of African Americans in the game now here in just a couple of moments for sure. Bob, what would you like to add to the conversation about the intersectionality of baseball and race and religion?
First, let me thank you for showing that video. That video made my day. It really did. And for those who were listening, the Brown that Mr. Johnson mentioned was the great Willard Brown. Willard Home Run Brown, as nicknamed by Josh Gibson. Willard Brown is in the National Baseball Hall of Fame. And Willard Brown after Mr. Johnson came and became the shortstop, moved to the outfield, became a great outfielder, and in Puerto Rico was nicknamed Ese Hombre, that man, because he won the Triple Crown in Puerto Rico twice. Yeah, he was a tremendous ball player. And the Bullet Rogan that Mr. Johnson referred to is the legendary Wilbur Bullet Rogan. Bullet Rogan was one of the first superstars of the newly formed Negro Leagues in 1920, along with Oscar Charleston. And Rogan has really come into play here recently because of all the excitement, and rightfully so, around the great Japanese ball player Shohei Ohtani. And everybody's fascinated by this two-way star. Well, the comparison had always been to Babe Ruth. Well, it's the wrong comparison because Ruth did not pitch his entire career. No, Ruth eventually moved into the outfield and stopped pitching altogether.
Right.
Bullet Rogan pitched his entire career. Bullet Rogan is one of the greatest pitchers this game has ever seen, a perennial 20-game winner who, when he wasn't pitching, he hit cleanup in the Monarchs lineup and played the outfield. He led the Negro Leagues in stolen bases when he was 38 years old. He got the nickname, and Mr. Johnson was absolutely right. Bullet Rogan was every bit as good as Satchel Paige. He wasn't as flamboyant as Satchel. See, when Satchel walked in the room, everybody knew that Satchel Paige was in the room, not Bullet Rogan. Bullet Rogan, he got the nickname Bullet because of the blazing fastball. And it's even more remarkable, he threw with a no wind-up delivery. Stood straight there and boom, that thing was on you before you knew it. So I had it, that when he mentioned those two names, it just, all this kind of came cascading back. But to your question, for me, I work in a sanctuary that deals with every aspect of what this program is all about. I am reminded, for those of you who have not been to the Negro Leagues Museum, for those of you who have, you know that there's this wonderful passage when you first walk into the gallery area of the museum, and it's taken from the Roman Catholic Bible, Ecclesiastes. And it simply says, my son, if you aspire to be a servant of the Lord, prepare yourself for testing, set a straight course and keep to it, and do not be dismayed in the face of adversity. And that was Negro Leagues baseball in a nutshell. Pastor Nathan, they loved the game so much that they were willing to endure the social adversity that would confront them as they traveled the highways and byways of our country just to play baseball. And it was that passion that would not only change our game, but would ultimately change our country. And so you can rest assured that so many of these athletes were grounded in their spirituality. They had to be in order to deal with everything that was coming their way. The baseball field really was their sanctuary. Their issues were getting to and from. You know, you can go and go play in the stadium, but you couldn't use their facilities, couldn't wash your uniforms, couldn't take a shower. You know, you didn't know where you might have a place to stay or a place that you could eat. And this was after riding into a town, filling up the ballpark, and not being able to get a meal from the same fans who had just cheered you, or not have a place to stay. So those athletes would sleep on the bus and eat their peanut butter and crackers until they could get to a place that would just offer them basic services, but they never allowed that set of social circumstances to kill their love of the game. And so there's something very spiritual just in that foundation alone. And Buck O'Neill and Mr. Johnson were great friends. Buck comes to the Monarchs in 1938. And I asked Buck, because Buck was, number one, the consummate glass half full guy. You know, wherever they see it half empty, Buck saw it half full. And his presence, the gentle spirit that he had, his amazing ability to love universally. And I would ask him, I said, Buck, where did that come from? And you know what he told me? He says, my daddy told me when I was a boy, treat every man the way you want to be treated. The golden rule. Now, we all know the golden rule. We just don't all live the golden rule. And Buck O'Neill took something that his father said to him when he was a boy, and it guided him throughout his life. And so, yeah, this is a shrine. It is, in its own way, its sanctuary, and it deals with every aspect that this program is all about. So I'm connected to it every single day. You know, but what we do, we talk about the gospel. Yeah, the joy that they had. We don't dwell on the social adversity. We look at what they did to overcome the adversity. And now try to use that to help other people in their lives maybe see things a little bit differently than they might have seen them before they experienced this story.
Yeah, super powerful, Bob. Thank you so much. Let's stay there. Let's go to talk a little bit about, so you mentioned kind of the impact individually that the Negro Leaguers like Mr. Johnson and others could have, and their stories can have. For the panelists, what, you know, from a broad perspective, what role do you see that the Negro Leagues and the players had in helping our country to fight for and to work towards civil rights? I know we have, you know, what I consider a civil rights icon and legend and warrior here with us tonight as well. Whoever wants to jump on that, yeah.
Well, I'm glad that you brought up the golden rule, because that really is how we were able to handle adversity. That's what we were taught at home. Okay. And I could say that also that Uncle Byron we've always talked about this, that there was no hate in hating a situation. Okay. It was the fact that it was their problem, and they need to work their problem out, but we know where we are. where we are going to be and how we are going to handle adversity. I would say there are some things that I think I really would like to touch upon about Byron E. Johnson. Not only, I mean, the baseball thing was huge. There's no question about that. But here's an educated person, a graduate of Wiley College, who taught biology, went into the service and all of those sort of things. But while he was a teacher, he filed a lawsuit, okay, along with, I think, 3 other ladies who taught school in Little Rock, Arkansas, because he was a member of the NAACP. And he was the only male teacher in this lawsuit. And Thurgood Marshall came to Little Rock to represent this group. And with that, they were able to get their jobs back. Okay, so it was the things that he was seeing in other cities and knowing that we as African Americans, or we were called Negroes at the time, okay, so Negroes were having, I can't really say a seat at the table, but was being heard in some other places that we weren't being heard in the South. So he stepped up during that period of time. He also filed a lawsuit here in Denver, discrimination in the post office. Unfortunately, didn't win it, but the point is that he was very centered. He knew who he was and whose he was, and would step up to those issues. So we learned that within our families. It was just something that was always there because we knew we were just as good as the next person, better in a lot of situations, but you always knew you were just as good as the next person. So those sort of things, he was involved in so many things. And other Negro baseball players did the same thing. I mean, you spoke earlier about what Hank Aaron had done. There were many others. Roberto Clemente was another one. It's been a while since, I played softball. I mean, I grew up with all of this around me. And I was into baseball as a kid. But to be honest with you, that I've gone on to other things. And Uncle Byron was one of the reasons. One was being golf. And that's another story I'll mention later. But anyway, those are the things that, we are challenged in so many different avenues, and that we have to learn how to handle those adversities as we go through them. And if you have a lot of hate in you, you can't get anything done. Okay, you really can't. So, and I agree. I've heard Buck sing that song many times. So it's just a part of the DNA, I would think, among us. The other piece I want to also mention, we've always known that we had to be twice as good, if not 3 times as good as the next person. Okay, on the baseball field, the softball field, the golfing, in a classroom, in the pulpit, you have got to be twice as good, if not 3 times as good. And that is what is a part of what drives a number of us, okay, especially from that era.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Carlotta. As you were sharing, I was thinking, like, man, those of you that are watching tonight, like, share the link with your family, with friends, or please go back and watch when you are battling your own battles and feeling discouraged, or people are discriminating against you in some way, to go back and remember that, to treat people the way that you want to be treated. And remember that it's about them. It's not about you.
Right.
So powerful, so helpful. Thank you, Carlotta.
Mm-hmm.
Bob, what do you think? What role have Negro Leaguers like Mr. Johnson played in helping us to have more civil rights, to fight for civil rights here in the U.S.?
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, they were activists before we even knew what word
activist meant. Yeah.
Yeah, because you have to understand, folks, that they had a defiant spirit. Hey, you won't let me play with you in the major leagues? I create my own. Yeah, I create my own. And that refusal to accept the notion that you're unfit to do anything. So I'll show you. And so when they created that league, that's one of the first salvos toward civil rights. Because I have to remind people that Jackie Robinson was handpicked from the great Kansas City Monarchs. Yeah, 1945 he played here. And Mr. Johnson was absolutely right. He was not the best player.
Right.
In the
he was not.
He wasn't the best player on his own Kansas City Monarch team. And again, that's not to disparage Jackie. It just speaks to how much talent was in the Negro Leagues. But Mr. Johnson was absolutely right. He was the right man to be the
right
first.
job. Mm-hmm.
Yes. He had, as I oftentimes like to refer, the intangibles that made him prepared to deal with the racial hatred that he would be confronted with. Celebrated collegiate, all-American football player at UCLA. So again, Mr. Johnson is absolutely right. He's college educated. He had served in the military. He was disciplined. He would become married to the beautiful Rachel Robinson. God bless her. She's still with us to this day, just as beautiful as she was when Jackie married her. So he's stable. All of those attributes would be called upon to deal with the immense racial hatred that individual was going to receive. A lot of those Negro Leaguers who had been so acclimated to segregation, they could not have handled the social aspect of that. Baseball would have been no problem. But when you're thrust into an environment where no one wants you to be there, Larry Doby, who's oftentimes forgotten, Larry Doby breaks the color barrier in the American League just weeks after Jackie does in the National League with the Cleveland Indians. And he talks about it. Larry Doby was only 23 years old. Jackie was more worldly, mature.
He was 28.
Yeah, he's old. He's old by baseball standards to be a rookie. And Larry Doby was 23 years old, thrown into a powder keg of racism. And when he walked into the Indians' locker room, no one would shake his hand. No one wanted to warm up with him on the field when they went out to play. That's that welcome to the major leagues. But as we make the assertion here at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, Jackie Robinson's breaking of the color barrier wasn't just a part of the civil rights movement. It was the beginning of the civil rights movement in this country. Again, this is 1947. This is well before those more noted civil rights occurrences. So this is before Brown versus the Board of Education. This is before Rosa Parks' refusal to move to the back of the bus. As our friend Buck O'Neill would so eloquently say, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was a sophomore at Morehouse College at that time. President Truman would not integrate the armed forces until a year after Jackie. So again, for all intents and purposes, this is what started the ball of social progress rolling in our country, baseball. And the Negro Leagues were right there at the forefront of that. And again, as Dr. Carlotta mentioned, it came at a cost. It put the Negro Leagues out of business.
Right.
Yeah, it put Negro Leagues out of business. Yeah, we used to run a film here, and the former CNN anchorman, Bernard Shaw, and he says in the film, he says, you might say that the Negro Leagues were so good that they put themselves out of business. That's exactly what happened. But progress comes at a cost. It always does.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bob.
The one thing I would just add to the mix too, and I think this builds on what Bob just said, is that the Negro Leagues, I think, are part of an amazing history of African American institution building. I mean, really thinking about, well, just in relationship to churches, Richard Allen and the role that he played in forming the African Methodist Episcopal Church as a response to being excluded. And that sense of, if you're not going to allow us to be in these churches, we'll create our own. And I'm just amazed to just read about not only the entrepreneurial spirit that built the Negro Leagues, but the kind of attendance that that these teams were getting, that in many respects rivaled, if not surpassed, the white major leagues.
It's so amazing. And I think that's why this story is so compelling, so awe-inspiring, because Byron Johnson was a college-educated man. And there was this overwhelming belief that these athletes who played in the Negro Leagues weren't smart enough to play in the major leagues. When in actuality, over 40% of the athletes who played in the Negro Leagues had some level of college education. Whereas less than 5% of those who played in the major leagues had any college education, for the simple reason that the major leagues didn't want you to go to college. They got you right out of high school, put you into their farm system, and then they worked their way to the big leagues. Well, the Negro Leagues didn't have that kind of sophisticated farm system. So what did they do? They trained on the campuses of historically Black colleges and universities. And they would play the Black college baseball teams, and then recruited a great deal of their workforce from those HBCUs, which is why they had a disproportionate number of college-educated athletes in comparison to the major leagues, yet they were the ones who were oftentimes characterized as illiterates, tramps, hobos. Jackie Robinson, folks, walks into a locker room where he was likely the most intellectual being in that locker room. I'm not sure there's been another Dodger that stepped foot on a college campus. Jackie had gone to Pasadena City College and UCLA, and yet he is treated in this incredibly harsh way until the Dodgers started to win. And when Jackie started to help the Dodgers win, all of a sudden it didn't matter what color Jackie was.
Winning changes or solves all problems, right?
It's amazing, man.
Still exists today, I think. So we chat a lot about Jackie and others that helped to integrate the major leagues. I know that last December, the Negro League stats are being recognized as major league stats. We'll come back to that as time allows, but I really want to talk about or ask you all, it's been pretty well documented recently, the decline of African-American Major League Baseball players, and that is significantly, has been more recently on the decline. And I shared, I oftentimes share with our congregation at Park Hill, we're an integrated congregation where we can sometimes be in a little bubble and think that that this is our norm, that of course every United Methodist Church looks like what we do, which isn't the case. The United Methodist Church itself here in the United States is about 93-94% white. And so it itself does not have a great track record of inclusion of African Americans. What does this matter? I mean, maybe I'm asking an easy question, but does it matter for Major League Baseball, for baseball, the sport, even at other levels of baseball, probably down to the youngest of ages, I imagine we'd see some of these statistics. And the same thing with the United Methodist Church. Does it matter that African Americans aren't an active contingent or well represented, or at least equally represented to our population in baseball or in the United Methodist Church? And if so, if you think it does, why? And what do you think we can do to both baseball and in the church, if you will, to change some of those statistics, to welcome and to include African Americans?
Nathan, you ask hard questions.
I'm going to ask the yes or no question first. That was easy, but then you have to back that up.
I think it's a problem, but I think it's a reflection for me, Nathan, of a lot of what's wrong with Major League Baseball today, because I think what we're seeing is the emphasis is not on selling a game, it's selling a brand.
Mhm.
The
Say more what you mean about that, Chris.
Well, I think in part, and I'll use the Boston Red Sox as an example of this. And now Boston, again, has a very complex history, frankly, a very terrible history related to racism. I would recommend to those who are tuning in to read Howard Bryan's excellent book called Shutout, which really gets into the reasons why the Boston Red Sox were the last team to integrate Major League Baseball. It's a very sobering book. But even today, Boston is a city that still struggles with issues of racism. You listen to, for example, Bill Russell, Boston Celtic great, Hall of Famer, had for a long time some pretty harsh things to say, as most athletes have, about their experience in Boston. But I think what is not so unique about Boston is to go to a Major League Baseball game is now so prohibited cost-wise. And it is a reflection again, and I think again, you see this in baseball history, going back to the 1950s when you had the Dodgers and the Giants in Brooklyn and in New York. The sense again that as the sport became more diverse, particularly in terms of more African American fans, baseball suddenly decided it was time to expand. Now, there were economic reasons behind that, but I do think Major League Baseball is in some ways become very isolated from sort of a broader sense of where the pulse of America is. Now, we live in a time, again, this is very different from even 50, 60 years ago. On a given day, you can tune in, and the variety of professional sports and the variety of sporting options available is just staggering. So that's sort of analogous to the kind of pluralism that we have in the United States right now. So is it unfortunate that more African Americans aren't playing baseball? I think it is. But is baseball allowing itself to change in the ways that the broader story of the country is changing? I don't know. Now, the one thing that gives me hope, and I think this is going to be the storyline in some way when we talk about baseball's future, is the amazing influx of Latinx players, the kind of dominant role that players from Central America, Caribbean, South America have had. Now, that's a history that I think also goes way back. But it is sort of analogous when we look at the fact that Christianity is coming out of the global South. That is something that I think is very telling. When we look at the fact that some of the biggest stars in the major leagues today are Latinx.
Right.
So that's a big part of the story. But I worry about the way that, and it's probably true of a lot of professional sports. I shouldn't say it's just baseball, but it is very much the sense that you are talking about a brand that is catering to a very, very small segment of affluent Americans.
Chris, you're being nice, I think, which is fine. I won't push you too much, but are you, that argument of kind of the traditions, the history, the unspoken rules of baseball, and when those rules are broken, oftentimes by, let's be honest, players of color, not always, but that are players of color. Like, is that kind of what you're alluding to? Like, no, we're Major League Baseball. We play by these rules and we treat people this way, and you better get in line, or there's not a place for you.
That sense of mythology. And I think, again, a very good example of that is Curt Flood, who really played a major role, I think, in breaking down this so-called reserve clause that really bound players to a particular team for life. Right. And I can still remember, I was very young, but the sense how Flood was ripped apart. And one of the few players who actually stood up for Curt Flood was Jackie Robinson.
Right. That's true. And wouldn't you say during that time too that the influx from the Caribbean after the Curt Flood ruling, I mean, it took a while, if I remember correctly, but all of a sudden we didn't have African Americans here in the United States playing baseball. Mm-hmm. What was it? Reggie Jackson went to Arizona, one of the Arizona universities, if I'm not mistaken. Mm-hmm. As you stated before, Jackie Robinson went to UCLA. Michael Byron went to Wiley College. They stopped baseball in colleges. University of Colorado used to have a great baseball team up there. Mm-hmm. Herb Brown, I think, was the coach. And then all of a sudden they start taking that out of the schools, out of the universities. And I think the last one that I know of, and like I said, I really don't keep up with it that much, but was really Reggie coming mm-hmm. out of University of Arizona. Then it became those coming from the Caribbean, which mm-hmm. were always here anyway. They That's were right. always playing baseball anyway. I know, there are a number of movies regarding that sort of thing. And Satchel Paige was one of those that, embraced a lot of those from other countries to play on his team that was also interesting. Before this is over, because I know we're getting close, I want you to know I had the opportunity not only to hear the chatter back and forth between Buck and Uncle Byron, but also, let me tell you, that's something else. Talking about their experiences during those days. But the other one is that I am here in Colorado because of him. He was one of those that was a part of the carpool that took me to school after the 101st Airborne were left Little Rock, or left the campus. And he brought his family here in 1958 because he did not want his two children to go through what I had been going through, which is what he witnessed on a daily basis there in Little Rock. And having the opportunity to do so many other things here, and how much he involved himself with young people. He had done that in Little Rock as being a playground supervisor. My mother was his southpaw pitcher. So, I mean, he had girls teams and mixed teams and so forth. He taught the right way to live with other people. Mm-hmm. That was all a part of him. And to do those sort of things, and then for Satchel Paige to come to Denver while I was still living at the house was truly, let me tell you, I stayed up all night listening to those stories. who was quite a person. And if you think about that, I mean, he played until what? He was 48, 49 years of age, somewhere.
Older than that.
And you're probably right, and probably could have played longer. So they were able to talk about those days and how they had achieved the various, how they had to work through various barriers, those, and laugh about it. They had to laugh about it. Otherwise, you'd cry. So those are sort of things that took place. The other piece was this: I had the honor of representing him in Saskatchewan, Canada. He is in the Hall of Fame there. And that's why I say, let's see what's going to happen here in Cooperstown. I've been to Cooperstown. I've seen what has happened there as well. So I'm really curious as to how MLB is going to handle this whole situation.
Yeah, and if I would add, I'm going back to the video of Mr. Johnson, and the owner of the Kansas City Monarchs was James Leslie Wilkinson. White man.
Right.
White
Right.
man. Yeah, James Leslie Wilkinson was the only white owner of the original 8 Negro League franchises. And initially, Rube Foster, who started the Negro Leagues in 1920, he did not want any white ownership. But he kept hearing these great things about this dude named J.L. Wilkinson. Wilkie was a 2,000 man in the 1900s. Now, I'm not going to say that he didn't see color, but he respected color. Yeah, it's
Right.
all right to see color. Yeah, but he didn't treat the color any differently than he treated the white guys. And so his players absolutely adored him. And they wanted to play for Wilkie. Buck O'Neil would say of J.L. Wilkinson that he was the first white man he ever met without any prejudice. When there weren't enough hotel rooms to go around, they slept in the same bed together. And so Wilkie was absolutely adored. He made his entire living in Black baseball. But going back to some of the things that Chris touched on and Carlotta mentioned, it's the stereotypical things that you saw. In the Negro Leagues, the major leaguers would accuse them of showboating. Oh, they just showboating. They don't play the game the right way.
Yeah.
And I think what they meant was they didn't play the game the white way. And the Negro Leagues had its own style. It had its own style. And what Buck O'Neil would oftentimes say, 2 things. He said, folks, number one, if you got something to show it. Yeah,
Right.
don't be ashamed, show it. But the other thing is the reason that the major leaguers was crying about showboating is only showboating when you can't do it. Yeah, and so today you see it now, and it's a Sports Center top 10 highlight if a guy dives in the hole and flips it behind his back to start the double play. They were doing that in the Negro Leagues 50, 60 years ago, and the fans, both Black and white, were in those stadiums, and they are jumping for joy, or as Buck would say, you couldn't go to the concession stand because you might miss something that you've never seen before. and so you're absolutely right. The Black players, those Afro-Latino players, if you flip the bat, you're disrespecting the game and you're doing things. And that has turned off a lot of kids away from our game. But what I talk about oftentimes is the thing that we love about baseball, and Chris touched on this, is its tradition. The thing that has hurt baseball is its tradition. Baseball is going to have to add an element of cool to the sport again. The Negro Leagues were never afraid to market its stars. The NBA and NFL have long understood this. But baseball, nobody's ever bigger than the team. But as Carlotta mentioned, when Satchel Paige rode into Denver, it was Satchel Paige and the Kansas City Monarchs. And not one of the other Monarchs were complaining because Satchel was going to get them a big payday.
That's right.
So the aspect of star power is something that we all attracted to, but particularly young players. But let me touch real quickly on the socioeconomic aspect that is also creating a schism in our game, particularly with urban kids. It saddens me every time I say this, but the days of sandlot baseball is over. It's over. You know, I grew up playing sandlot baseball. You didn't even have to have 9 kids on a team. Whatever number you had, you divided them up and you played. And if you hit the ball in Miss Jones' yard, you were out. You know, you made up your rules and everything that went along with it. Our sport has become tremendously organized now. And so it essentially went from a blue collar sport to a country club sport. It is a very expensive sport to play when it's organized now. Because I know folks who are paying almost college tuition for their kids to play summer baseball. Because now they got to play on these travel teams and the league fees. The equipment is exorbitantly expensive. You got to buy shoes that you can only wear to play baseball in. Yeah, I can go get a pair of basketball sneakers. I can play basketball and then I can walk around in them. So you got all of these things that have really started to price kids out of our game. So we're working with Major League Baseball and Major League Baseball's Players Association, who certainly have acknowledged that there is an issue here, and now starting to try and figure out ways to combat that. Well, it starts with bridging that financial gap, you know, and so we've got to create opportunities for our kids to be introduced to this sport. I don't want a child to not play baseball because they never had a chance to afford to play baseball. Now, if you don't like it, you don't like it. That's a whole nother story, but we're trying to bridge that economic gap. And then the other thing that we try to do as part of the solution to this problem, Nathan, when they walk into the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, what do they see? They see people who look just like them.
Absolutely.
Played this game as well as anyone ever played this game. But not only did they play the game, they owned teams. They were managers and coaches and traveling secretaries and team physicians. They fulfilled every aspect that you could within the business of the game of baseball. And so I think all of that is important, you know, as we look at solving this issue. And I think baseball realizes that it is indeed an issue. And hopefully we're starting to see more kids drafted. So we're starting to get more kids playing. Now we've got to get them seen. You know, Chris, it reminds me when you talk about the Red Sox. I remember Larry Doby saying that he tried to get the Cleveland Indians to sign Henry Aaron, Willie Mays, and Ernie Banks. And folks, the scouting report came back and said Henry Aaron had a hitch in his swing, Willie Mays couldn't hit the curveball, and Ernie Banks had no range. And what you had was a scout that had predetermined that he didn't want that many black players on that Indian team. Now, if this scout had really done his job, and they would have signed those 3 future Hall of Famers to join Larry Doby, folks, we would be talking about the Cleveland Indians the way that we talk about the Yankees of yesteryear. The pendulum of power would have shifted. But some guy made that decision. And you know what? Sad to say, we're still seeing that in the game. You would think that talent alone would be the only thing that is necessary to give you an opportunity. Unfortunately, it is not.
That's right.
You know, and so you still deal with some of that in this sport.
You're making this former Ohioan drool over here, thinking about.
And with that pitching staff that the Indians had at that time, oh man, nobody would have touched them. You know, when you stop to think about it, though, it worked out the way that it was, with each of those legendary players going and creating their own niche in Atlanta, in New York, and later San Francisco, and in Chicago. And so, but it's amazing to think, but Boston had his pick of the litter of Negro League players, and they turned them all down.
That's right.
Henry Aaron, Willie Mays, Ernie Banks weren't good enough to play for the Red Sox.
And Jackie Robinson.
And Jackie Robinson.
Yep.
They only broke down when everybody else had one, and they had to go finally get one. And they signed Pumpsy Green, and nothing against Mr. Green. He was a 2-time All-Star. But man, you could have had Henry Aaron and Willie Mays and Ernie Banks and Jackie Robinson, you know, but they didn't want a black player.
Yep.
Yeah.
No, it's a history, Bob, that I'm very much aware of. And again, I mentioned Howard Bryant's book,
it's amazing.
Shutout. It's a very fascinating study of the racial history of Boston and how that came into play in the Red Sox organization.
Yeah, the Yawkey family, they had a pretty staunch reputation.
Yes, they did.
Mm-hmm.
Well, friends, we are about out of time. As the three of you were talking, we're talking about the parallels between baseball and religion, particularly Major League Baseball. We'll say the United Methodist Church, which is my area of expertise and experience. And you talked about tradition. The way that I hear that, and we oftentimes talk about that at Park Hill, is accommodation versus assimilation. Are we going to make people come and join us and act and behave just like we do and leave their culture and traditions at the door, or might we make a space for them? We can't go into that more deeply, but I just saw that there's a lot of parallels, but that one's kind of jumped off the page for me.
Sounds like part two.
What's that? What was that, Bob?
I said, it sounds like part two of a.
That's right, part two.
Well, there's a very famous expression by late historian Jaroslav Pelikan. Tradition is the living faith of the dead. Traditionalism is the dead faith of the living. And that I think says a lot.
Say that again, Chris, so that people can hear it.
Tradition is the living faith of the dead. Traditionalism is the dead faith of the living. And I think that applies to faith communities, and I think in some ways it applies to baseball.
Because while baseball is reinventing itself, we also understand that the church has to reinvent itself as well.
That's right.
We have more than one preacher on the call tonight, I see. Speaking of preachers, we're going to take a pause. I realize, friends, we're after 8. If you need to move on, Mountain Time, if you need to move on with the rest of your evening, please feel free to do that. I hope that you have enjoyed our conversation tonight. We are going to, if our panelists are up for it, we'll take a couple of questions here in just a moment and wrap up here shortly after that. But before we move on to that, go ahead and put your questions in the chat box here on Zoom. If you're on the Zoom call still, if you're over on YouTube, and I see there are folks over there watching as well, and you have access to the chat box, feel free to put your questions in the chat box. I'm going to invite Reverend Dr. Don Messer to be with us and share a little bit of invitation we have this evening to continue to help support the anti-racism work that Park Hill United Methodist Church and the United Methodist Association of Retired Clergy and Friends are doing together. Don?
Well, thank you. Like everyone else that's been watching this evening, I'm super excited. I should report to the panelists that while we may have gone a little long, the numbers are increasing, not decreasing. People are not cutting off. They're getting more people on this webinar. So that's a pretty high compliment to all of you and how you have shared tonight. It's been a great honor. This is a part of the anti-racism efforts of our church. And we are grateful for all of you. I'm going to ask Laura to put up a screen share here so you can see that we want to thank the sponsors of this webinar, particularly the Byron Johnson family, the daughter, Dr. Jacqueline Benton, who has been so helpful in helping us plan this, along with other family members, Lisa and Dominic, and colleagues there at the church. We have really been a part of our program. We've raised about $7,500 so far in this anti-racism advocate. We hope that Byron Johnson is on the way to Cooperstown, but we're going to start by putting him in Park Hill United Methodist Church. We don't want to ask for something that we're not doing. So we're putting a permanent plaque up, and we're having a plaque, and you can have your name on it. There's various levels: Grand Slam, 3,000 plus, home run to 1,000, triple 500 to 999, double, single. Get your name on our plaque here. Let's get at least $10,000. We're at 7,500. We have baseball cards, special baseball cards that we prepared You can see it over here in the corner here that we will give to everyone. This is a fundraising effort by our stewardship committee led by Wendy Miles Boykin. We want to have you mail your checks to Park Hill if you wanted to join in this campaign, contribute using our website, or text your amount to 877-959-7806. We are celebrating the real great history of Byron Johnson. As a boy from South Dakota who saw my first baseball game in Kansas City and was a Dodger fan with Jackie Robinson, and I thought everybody had forgotten Duke Snider. So I was really surprised to hear that from Carlotta tonight. So my boyhood heroes appeared again. But I want you to be a hero and join our anti-racism advocacy. And if you'd like to join in honoring Byron Johnson and the Negro Baseball League, we can do it. Start right in our home church in the coffee room there with a beautiful plaque in his honor. So I turn it back to you, Pastor, and let's continue.
Great. Thank you so much, Don. I see two questions. Why don't we take both of those and we'll call it an evening, I think. So the first question is simply from one of our members, Chris, who's just asking you, Bob. She respectfully called you Mr. Kendrick, but Mr. Kendrick, if you would share another story about Ernie Banks.
Well, one of my favorite stories associated with Mr. Let's Play 2 is that Ernie Banks' career began right here in the Negro Leagues with the Kansas City Monarchs. He played for Buck O'Neil, and the legendary Cool Papa Bell would actually call Buck about this young ball player that he had seen in Dallas, Texas. Cool Papa was managing what they called a junior Monarchs. The Monarchs had a second team that was traveling, and he's down in Dallas, Texas, and he sees this kid named Ernest Banks. And Cool Papa Bell and the late great Bill Skinny Legs Blair, who lived in Dallas, was the publisher of the Elite News. They're still publishing a weekly paper there. And they called Buck and say, Buck, I think we got one for you. And Buck said, can he pick it? Mr. Blair said, Buck, he can pick it. And Cool Papa Bell recommends to Buck that you need to sign this kid. And if Cool Papa Bell recommends you, you must be pretty doggone good. And so Buck would sign Ernie Banks. Ernie would come here to Kansas City. And then, of course, he had his time interrupted by the war. He would go and spend, a little over a year plus in the war. And then he rejoined the Monarchs in 53. And by the end of the 53 season, he was signed, of course, away by the Chicago Cubs. And the interesting thing about it, and this is food for thought, a young Ernie Banks did not want to leave the Kansas City Monarchs. He was fearful of isolation because with the Monarchs, he's with his guys. They're not only going to play the game together, after the game, they're going to go eat dinner. They're going to the nightclub together. They're going to hang out. He was in his comfort zone. He knew that when he left to go to Chicago, he was going to be isolated. And he absolutely was. He and the great Gene Baker, they formed the Major League's first African-American double play tandem. And both had played for the Kansas City Monarchs, even though they didn't play together. They had both played for the Kansas City Monarchs and both played for Buck O'Neil. And the Buck O'Neil and the rest of the guys said, Ernie, you gotta go. You have to go. Because when you go and succeed, you're going to create an opportunity for the next one to go. And that sunny disposition that you all we all fell in love with, the Let's Play 2, is a beautiful day, Let's Play 2. That was Buck O'Neil. Buck O'Neil was like a father figure to Ernie Banks. He taught him not only how to play the game, as Buck would say, I didn't really teach him how to play the game. Ernie Banks could play. I taught him how to love the game. And he taught him social skills. He taught him how to dress. And so when you saw Ernie Banks, if you didn't know Buck O'Neil, you saw Buck O'Neil. But it all began here with the Kansas City Monarchs. And when Ernie was here with the Monarchs, his roommate, Chris, was the great Elston Howard, the
Oh my
first
goodness.
Black Yankee.
That's right. Who actually finished his career in Boston.
He finished his career in Boston.
Yeah,
and of course, Ellie would become the first Black most valuable player in the American League.
Yeah.
And you got to remember that the American League was very slow to sign Black players. The National League was far more aggressive. So Carlotta's Dodgers were way ahead of the game. They had 6 or 7 Black players before half the major leagues had even integrated. And so the Yankees were one of the last teams, and they signed Elston Howard, and Ellie would become the American League's first Black MVP.
Wow.
Carlotta, I wanted to ask you, did you get to see Don Newcomb?
Oh, yes. I saw Don Newcomb pitch, and we would go to St. Louis to see the Brooklyn Dodgers and the St. Louis Cardinals. So that I saw Don Newcomb and Roy Campanella and even I can't think of his name now. He came up later as the shortstop with the Dodgers, but that was in Los Angeles.
Okay.
I hated it when they moved from
sure.
Brooklyn to Los Angeles. I'm an old Brooklyn Dodger fan, but the Dodgers are still my second team. I have to get behind the Rockies. I was happy to see that we had finally gotten a major league team here in Denver. So
cheering for the Dodgers here in Denver can be dangerous, Carlotta. I know that much. I've learned that in my time.
Right.
Our last question comes from Chip, who's a member here at Park Hill. He writes, after Bam Cunningham broke the color line for Southern colleges, effectively destroying HBCU football, Deion Sanders is trying to bring it back, and he wonders if maybe that's a possibility with baseball as well.
You know what? I hope it is, because I couldn't be more excited about what I've seen with Deion Sanders and now my friend Eddie George over at Tennessee State University, 2 former NFL greats who are now going back to historically Black colleges and universities, bringing the spotlight with them to those HBCUs. The HBCUs were essentially the Negro Leagues. Yeah, they were essentially the Negro Leagues, and they're right. When I will always believe that Bear Bryant purposely scheduled USC to come into Tuscaloosa and let them turn Sam Cunningham loose so that he could build his case so he could go start to sign Black players. And that's exactly what happened. Sam the Bam Cunningham ran all over Alabama, and essentially Bear Bryant said, I'm gonna go get me one of those. And then Alabama hadn't stopped since.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And it almost destroyed those HBCUs though, and so it is great to see those 2 megastars go back to HBCUs. And I think we're going to start to see a shift of guys starting to make that same kind of move. And maybe we'll see these HBCUs rise to prominence once again in that world of athletics. They're still educating a lot of students and educating them extraordinarily well, and sending some well-equipped people out into this world who are doing some great things.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I would be remiss if I didn't give the 3 of you a final word. If you want to say anything as we wrap up our time this evening, Chris or Carlotta or Bob.
Again, Nathan, thank you so much for including me tonight. It's been a privilege to be a part of this panel. The area of conversation, and again, I think part of what sports does is, on one hand, if you're a fan, it can be something that is a form of escapism. And I mean that in a positive way. I mean, we talk about our favorite teams, and the emotion of winning and losing. And one of the worst experiences that I had when the Red Sox blew Game 6 of the 1986 World Series with Bill Buckner, I had to face a congregation of Met fans the next morning. That was not, I didn't enjoy that at all. But I think part of what the conversation does underscore is not only the importance of baseball, but just the importance of history, to hear the stories that we've heard tonight about Byron Johnson, about the history of the Negro Leagues, the kind of issues that we're facing today, the challenges. It is so important to remember our past, and it's just been a privilege to play a small role in the conversation tonight. So thank you for having me here.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Chris.
Same here.
Carlotta,
Thank you very much.
Can we give you the last word? Why don't we go to Bob? And then since you're Carlotta and you are Byron's niece, I want you to have the last word tonight, if that's all right.
Okay.
Well, I echo everyone's sentiment. What a tremendous honor to have a chance to be a part of this. So thank you all for extending the invitation to me. My trips out to the Denver area have always been so welcoming. The hospitality has been amazing. But, you know, I talk from a space and a place where we have what I think is one of the most important cultural institutions in the world. And why I love this place, it moves beyond the tremendous talent that was there in the Negro Leagues. This museum, I think, fortifies the importance of diversity, inclusion, equity, as we continue down the pathway of trying to bring about more tolerance and respect amongst all of us, you know, because what sports teaches us, and it's a tremendous bridge. You know, sports has been the biggest barrier breaker in our society. That, along with music, those two things have united us in ways in which very few things have in our society. But what they teach us is that we have far more in common than we do differences. Yeah. But what we need to embrace is that our differences are not things that we should be running from. We should be embracing them. Those are the things that make us unique. Or as one of the posters here at the Negro Leagues Museum says, 440 feet is 440 feet, no matter what color your skin is.
How about that?
Thank you guys for having me.
Thank you so much, Bob.
Well, thank you very much, Nathan. I first of all like to thank the group that put this together in honor of a person who is quite deserving. It's unfortunate that all of you didn't get a chance to know him over those years. He was quite a person who taught in various ways. It was more about action than constantly talking about things. So one thing that I hope that everyone who's listening will understand, that we really need to know your history, the history of various things. And I agree with you, sports and the arts, which includes music and poetry and writing and so forth, visual arts and so forth. Those are barrier breakers, and sports has done it and continues to do it. I look forward to the Olympics every 4 years because we're bringing all these people who are different, a lot of diversity together, and respect comes from that. And we need to teach more respect in our homes regarding other people. And that is one thing that Byron Johnson and Christine Johnson did teach. And so I'm very thankful that you have put this event together. And I hope those that are listening have learned something about the Negro League that I know I grew up with and enjoyed, and knowing the various ones that did participate in it. And also kudos to my church, Park Hill United Methodist Church. I have been a member there. Our family has been a member there since 1963, actually 62. But And I'd like to just throw this little piece in here. We were the second, the Walls family was the second African Americans to join Park Hill. And that was because it was a welcoming place, because the minister knocked on our door one Thursday afternoon and invited us to Park Hill United Methodist Church. And you don't get that type of community as now as you did then. People spoke to each other, they talked to each other and invited you to certain things. And we need to get back to that sort of foundation. And that, as I said, that's the reason that we belong to there at Park Hill United Methodist Church, due to Reverend J. Carlton Babbs, who was from Ohio, by the way, Nathan.
I know.
But anyway, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to just be a part of this panel.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Carlotta. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Bob. I always joke sometimes, 10-year-old Nathan could never imagine the opportunity to be able to chat with the three of you this evening. It's been a privilege and an honor. Thank you both, or thank you all rather, for taking the time out and sharing with us this evening. There are people cheering for part 2 in the chat section here, so we'll be in conversation.
That would be great.
Three of you again. Thank you to everybody who's joined us tonight. Thank you to everyone who helped to make this possible, both behind the scenes tonight, like Pastor Laura, who's been helping with all of the tech stuff, but also all those that helped to plan and to organize for our time here together. Thank you to everyone who's already given to our continued anti-racist efforts, and to those that have given tonight or might give into the future. Hope you all have a fantastic night. Be safe. Go Rays, go Rockies, go whomever you root for. Enjoy the rest of your night. Thanks for being with us here today.
Thank you, Nathan. Good night, everyone.
Good night. All right.
Should we just go ahead and end it?